everybody. Is this, how's the sound level? Is it good? I thought that I would read a little both of the things I do, fiction and poetry tonight, and I'll begin with this recent novel. It was published in England, not here, and he has world rights, so we can't publish it here, but it is available, and I've actually brought some copies. Its title is Miranda's Book, and it's about the main character is a young woman who lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. This goes back 30 years, 1986. She's been married for 11 years. She was originally from New York City, from Brooklyn, and she married a man who's an academic, and he's teaching at the University of Cincinnati. And it is not an ideal marriage, and the novel begins to tell that story. So I'll begin right at the beginning. Miranda turned to look up, holding the screen door partly open. Sunlight angled in from the south side of the porch so that hard shadows, one of them hers, stood out against the front porch's blue-painted floorboards. A trembling needle of glare rebounded from the brass doorknob, or rather a miniature sunburst of needles. Eye-catching, at least for someone who had the habit of interrogating her surroundings, as though a porch or a doorknob could be pregnant with meaning, could trigger a decision or an action. But you need a wide survey to turn up anything helpful. This morning's message must be something mucky to judge by a line of bird droppings speckling the stone steps down to the walk, and the fact that a friendly dog had left his calling card on the lawn. Nothing especially enlightening, and Miranda wondered whether she or Rob would get stuck with the cleanup. Meanwhile, spring warmed earth and flower fragrances in the air were enough to distract anyone from the process of stalking insights, as Arlette constantly teased her for doing. Well, that's just the gentle satire of a friend, she explained to the internal scorekeeper. Still, I am too self-absorbed, which is why I have trouble ever making plans and carrying them out. Strange how that basic tentativeness clashed with her own decisive body language, the direct gaze, the long neck. She was often conscious of whipping around like an offended swan when people behind her spoke or touched her shoulder. The house she and Rob had lived in for 6 years resembled every other overgrown bungalow in the neighborhood of Clifton. Not literally. For the McCarthy's brick construction and square white columns, the place next door might substitute brown shingles and dark green window frames, and the one next over white clapboard and black shutters. But the effect was the same. All exhibited the dull patina of the owner's quiet self-approval. It would be a mistake to expect anything else in the academic ghetto of Cincinnati, which counted professional blandness as one of the strongest arguments in favor of Clifton real estate. Miranda resided there, but it wasn't home. Not the neighborhood, not Cincinnati. In fact, no location in the state of Ohio would ever seem anything but skin deep to someone who'd grown up in Brooklyn. With almost daily strolls along the promenade, the vistas onto Manhattan's spiky lower tip grown so predictable that you stopped seeing them at all, until Uncle Matthew, whose hand she held, would call his little charge's aimless attention to alterations in the skyline or some gaily colored but unrecognizable flag flying from the mast of a ship moving into the harbor. Happiness. Someone she didn't know, 33, 35, bearded, was sitting in a car parked curbside, unoccupied, just watching. Which people didn't do, not in Clifton. She closed the door of the Volvo and glanced in its rearview mirror, but he wasn't in range, even when she tilted it. How concerned should she be? She flipped on the AC, the car had been sitting in the sun, and began backing out. Though the crime rate jumped this past year, nothing had happened on their block. Anyway, the burglar alarm was set, so she wasn't going to be anxious, at least not about break-ins. Like the radio, today's burning issue switched back on. Annoyance at Rob. Annoyance, or something even stronger, fused with the image of him, someone she never described as her husband, standing at his study door that morning. "I'm not having dinner here, Ran," He scowled, an unapologetic smile through his neatly trimmed beard before stamping back inside the study to reach for a sheet of papers on the desk. His agenda: morning classes, lunch with Karen Waters, afternoon conferences with students, after which he planned to meet Charles for a drink and dinner. Always Charles. She said nothing, and then Rob cleared his throat and walked away. The car was out of the drive and turning into the street now. Slowly accelerating, she glanced once more at the stranger, handsome kind of, who, she was fairly certain, returned the look. For Charles Dawson, having a taste for well-prepared food was part of being a patrician, a subcategory of his general distinction. Although a meal at some new restaurant downtown might sometimes be welcome, Miranda wasn't ever asked to join them. Rob didn't provide an explanation, in keeping with his usual MO. Never apologize, never explain. Just lay it all out as a done deed. Charles's retirement from the religion department of the university hadn't affected his mentor relationship to Rob, and certainly didn't soften his indifference to Miranda. A mentor who was single and closet gay, people said, even if they lacked hard evidence. He'd been pretty careful. You never saw him except in the company of friends, known quantities of normality. No, Miranda was sure people had it wrong. Her Uncle Matt, the sweetest person ever, was, as he termed it, homosexual, and she didn't find much resemblance. If you really paid attention, you noticed how Charles's gaze always zoomed in on any reasonably young and viable female body within range. Besides, he'd once given Rob a sheaf of letters, carbon copies of letters, written many years ago to a girl whom he said he loved very much and who had later died. Miranda read them over Rob's shoulder. Exquisitely written. Too well written, in her sense of things, to qualify as real love letters. In any case, bothering to save carbon copies for posterity suggested a database, not a heart. Miranda had grown up in a circle where people thought before they spoke, but she'd never known anyone whose words and gestures and pauses and glances were all designed, well-oiled vehicles of extra significance, if you cared to notice. An innuendo virtuoso, Charles's conversation was continual allegory, a skill she partly envied, since she didn't have it at all. Everything she said was thumpingly literal and meant, which sometimes got her in trouble because people found what they assumed were hints in her words, unintended signals, she hadn't been attentive enough to notice and censor. She'd often wondered whether Charles had adopted an apparently celibate status as a neat match to his academic specialty, medieval monasticism in Northern Europe. But just maybe she'd figured it wrong, and Charles was gay. The attention he paid to Rob resembled love, and Rob had the looks of a Gothic novel icon, black hair and beard flecked with only a little gray, intense black eyes, glinting fire, when he set his students straight or told Miranda to get over herself. Also, a physical construction that reflected 5 weekly sessions, armed clashes really, on the squash court. But more important than Rob's general attractiveness was his status as Charles's protege, the prime conveyor of Professor Dawson's intellectual legacy to the world of religious history. Miranda hardly figured in the equation at all, and when the three were thrown together, Charles seldom addressed a word to her. All she had to offer was the female gender, nonchalance, and a sense of style lost on everyone except favorably disposed friends. The words actually formed in her mind. I never used to be bitter. Personal style, not fashion. She didn't care to spend a lot of time shopping or nattering on with hairdressers. Her clothes were ethnic imports, what Rob described as anthropological couture. Long batik skirts, African beads, serapes. She liked them because they deftly sidestepped the issue of whether to be trendy or not, something she could never sort out to her satisfaction. But you can't go naked, and she trotted out her peasant blouses and amber bracelets for every sort of event, fully aware Charles thought they were silly. Aware, too, that she was flouting dress codes at Cincinnati, where the religion department's faculty wives avoided fashion by another method. They went the mail order catalog route. Reasonable prices, unremarkable cuts, and sure to be more or less the same thing as their friends and associates would be wearing. Part of her wished she could be satisfied with that, a protective coloration that would spare her some of the comments slingshot in her direction when she appeared for drinks at the Freibergs, dinner with the Dunwoodies, or the annual post-graduation reception. In predictable, harmonious settings, she was the dissonant note, which had its advantages. Being billed as the eccentric artist helped her get through the evening. Besides, in these last smug years of the Reagan administration, you somehow had to set yourself apart from the moneyed good taste of suburban America. Something with a little more color. When she practiced her oil painting, she took Vuillard as her model, the way he had of juxtaposing oddly contrasting patterns, print dresses in several hues against busily interesting wallpaper, figuration on figuration. That couldn't be accidental. No, it reflected her own way of seeing and thinking. One or more frames of reference superimposed, like photographic double exposures. A mental habit Rob characterized as charmingly unanalytical when he was in a good mood. Otherwise, he said she was muddle-headed. Like all women, she mentally supplied. During their 11 years of marriage, Rob had achieved enough self-mastery not to say everything he thought. Still, analysis does come in several different packages, defending her brand of it to herself, not to anyone else. She'd think of an incident, in some ways trivial, but also revealing. The not exactly earth-shaking location was the living room, where the mistress of the house, in anticipation of Rob's colleagues coming to dinner, was putting some flowers, stock, snapdragon, irises, larkspur, into a sort of country-like arrangement. She glanced up and saw herself in the facing mirror, which framed the flowers, the brightly patterned Italian ceramic vase, Madame House and Garden in Moroccan robe, and one of her paintings positioned in the lower left corner. A perfect bourgeois moment, the difference being that glossy magazine comfort and visual chic jarred with her frame of mind, directly opposed it. She raised an old question crumpled from being roughly handled so many times. Why, considering her belief that women should be completely independent, didn't she live up to it? Here she was, freighted with diplomas and a fully operative brain, making her contribution to society as a glorified housewife, imagining that her painting might someday amount to something if she could find time to work on it, and if she could get back to New York. Snapdragon here, iris there. Next room over in the mirror, a woman whose only appealing features were smooth skin, hazel eyes, and high cheekbones wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, brushing aside a wisp of reddish-brown hair. It didn't seem startling to hear her public voice say, "Knowing what I should do, in my case, is a substitute for actually doing it." For some people, stupidity, not inertia, was the ultimate crime. If she had taken that image of domestic harmony and made a painting of it, she would convey, or try to convey, that the surface loveliness, the flowers, rococo ornament, embroideries, concealed a stinging ambiguity. The gracious hostess knew she shouldn't be in that picture. And guess what? She was going to leave things exactly as they were. Something cool and withdrawn, some traits she had in common with small mammals like lemurs or marmosets. Wouldn't let her be the other stereotype either. Breathing fire, spouting slogans, or, God forbid, acting on them. But she does end up acting on them.